meeting is being recorded.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Kate Rademacher, and this is Writing for Your Life. This is our second Tuesday discussion group for spiritual writers, and it's really a pleasure to be back with you all. And I'm especially grateful to our speaker tonight, Amanda Udis-Kessler. How did I do? Amanda Udis-Kessler. I practiced ahead of time. She can correct me. So Amanda has been a long time participant in Writing for Your Life, and particularly of this group. I think of you, Amanda, is coming to quite a bit, the second Tuesday group. So it's really wonderful to have Amanda here as our presenter, talking about spirituality of creativity. She's going to tell you more about her background and experience. She's written 3 books, the last of which just came out recently and is wonderful. So Amanda, thank you so much for being with us. And I'm particularly really interested in this topic, the spirituality of creativity. So look forward to your thoughts and your guidance. So thanks again.
Well, thanks so much. It's really a pleasure to be here. This group has been important to me in times past, and so I'm happy to come and give something back. I want to make sure that my slide advanced and that you are seeing grounding body prayer. Okay, excellent. So we're going to start with a little prayer. Because of the way the Zoom boxes work, you're not actually going to see me do this, so I'm going to talk through it, and I will do it myself and invite you to join me. This is a prayer for which the movements were developed by Julian of Norwich. And Julie Payne Britton and I have added some descriptive text that so I will speak through it as we do it. This involves moving your arms and hands into 4 postures, but please modify the movements in any way that you need to so that you can participate safely, comfortably, and with integrity. So for our first posture, we will await. Cup your hands and hold them open with your arms in front of your waist or your chest or wherever you can reasonably hold them. But the important thing is that they are cupped and kind of open to the ceiling or the sky, wherever you might be. Holding this posture, we await the presence of the sacred, expressing our openness to being moved and nourished by the spirit of creativity. In the second posture, we allow. Raise your arms in the air as high as they will go with your hands open and your palms facing forward. Holding this posture, we allow the world to be exactly as it is, just for this moment. We allow ourselves to be exactly as we are, just for this moment. Our hands are open in gratitude and receptiveness. We allow the spirit of creativity to move in, through, between, and among us. Third posture, we accept. Bring your hands to your chest and cradle your heart. Holding this posture, we accept that we are each a beloved part of a beloved universe, and that creativity is our birthright, a sacred spark burning within each of us. And for the fourth posture, we attend. Reach your arms out in front of you, with hands open and palms facing up. Holding this posture, we attend to the sacred invitation to be and to become our best selves, to live lives of love, flourishing, and creativity, and to offer our gifts, including our creative gifts, to a beautiful and broken world. And with that, we end the body prayer. So I thought that I would, by way of introduction, say a little bit about my own creative life. I have 3 books, all of which were published by regular publishers. This year, 2 of them came out: Abundant Lives, A Progressive Christian Ethic of Flourishing, which I think is the book Kate was talking about. And then a sociology book called Cultural Processes of Inequality, which is another piece of my life we won't talk about here. Some years back, my doctoral dissertation was published as the book Queer Inclusion in the United Methodist Church. I'm also one of the main contributors to the collection A Liturgy for All Bodies, for which I wrote an essay and contributed some liturgy and some music. I have essays in another more than 10 books. I have an extensive collection of free use progressive sacred music, so hymns, worship songs, and rounds, available at queersacredmusic.com. In the course of my life, I've written and preached over 150 sermons. I've designed and taught probably well over 10 college courses, but that was years ago, so I haven't been counting recently. And one of my side gigs these days is that I offer trainings like this on creativity. I also offer trainings on developing inclusive liturgy, and I do trainings on how white people can do anti-racism work. So that gives you a glimpse of kind of the range of my creative life. For me, and I have been reflecting on creativity for half a century, almost, and it often for me comes down to what I call paradoxes of creativity, these complex realities that we have to sit with and absorb because they really are quite complex. The one we all know about is perspiration and inspiration, or what I usually call grit and grace. So we all know that to create a new product, to write a book, to develop a relationship, to bring something new into the world, or to put things that already exist together in new ways somehow, we are going to have to labor and work. But we also are going to have to be open to inspiration that we don't necessarily control when or how it comes. We can talk about that even as the spirit blowing where she will. So perspiration and inspiration lead to a number of other ways of stating what these paradoxes are. There's work in creativity, but there's also waiting. There's effort, a lot of effort, so much effort. And yet there's also this need for patience. Because again, if it were all perspiration, if it were 100% perspiration, we wouldn't need inspiration. But we all know it's not. There are those moments of grace and access and these gifts. And we have to be patient even as we engage in our effort. Another paradox for me is the mix of sensory engagement and silence. So we have to be fully in the world. We have to be mindful of what's going on around us. And our senses have to be in play. And yet we also have to be able to stop and be silent in order to wait, in order to receive. This pairing also means an interesting mix of mindfulness and mindlessness. So we have to be fully present, and yet we also have to be ready to daydream. We have to be awake, and yet we have to be distractible, because who knows what is going to trigger that moment of inspiration. A different paradox is that we have to learn the rules of our chosen creative form in order, in part, to break them more effectively. So creativity that is simply about breaking rules and therefore really has no structure or rules involved at all doesn't often turn out to be all that good. If we learn the rules, however, we are at risk, if we stick to them too closely, of simply creating something that is mundane and reproduces what's already out there that isn't really original. And so some rule breaking is often called for, but we can't break the rules really effectively unless we are really familiar with them. Another one of these paradoxes involves the fact that to be creative, we have to be both knowers and learners. So when we create, part of the effort is drawing on our prior training and experiences. You know, all that has shaped us, all that has made us who we are, all of our studies, all of our former practice and former experiences and so on. In this sense, we bring a lot to every creative moment, and yet we are trying in a way to go beyond what we already know and what we've already done. The doing of something new means the going beyond. So to be open to going beyond, we have to be learners as well as knowers, which means we have to have this fascinating mix of confidence in ourselves and our skills, in our right to create something, in the idea that we have something useful and meaningful to say, but also the humility of knowing that we are always learning, that there's always something new to learn. There's always more inspiration to break in our direction. Then, for me, this one's quite marvelous, the complexity of freedom and restrictions. So I personally find a tremendous amount of value in my creative life in freely choosing some degree of unfreedom, that is, to restrict myself in my forms. In my music life, this means that these days I'm often composing new hymn texts to traditional hymn tunes. So there's the restriction right there. I'm limited in how to write the text based on the scansion of the tune and what syllable will go where, and making sure that I line up the words with the notes exactly, and so on. In writing books, especially when you have a publisher who's interested, they give you a word count limit. And believe me, that is a real restriction. At least it has been for me. And these restrictions can make life harder, but by taking some of our options away and focusing in on the options we still have, the restriction can actually be freeing. And I find that complex and deeply meaningful. I mentioned work and waiting earlier. There's also a sense of work and play in creativity. So if it's all drudgery, if it's all labor, it may still be something new, but it isn't creativity at its most joyous. And so for me, keeping some sense of play about this is really important. And so navigating between the work aspect and the play aspect has been a really interesting experience for me. And I think this is the last point on this slide, the paradox of comfort and discomfort. So when the effort, the labor, the travail of creating can be uncomfortable, it can be difficult. When we are trying to birth something new in the world, in a creative project, that can be hard. We can indeed groan in our travail, as it were. And yet there is a comfort in having the ideas that we have developed begin to take shape. There is an ease in seeing what we have completed and seeing that it is in fact good. And so if we are not at least somewhat comfortable, we won't have the stamina and resilience to keep laboring. So there's this kind of interplay between comfort and discomfort that feels important to me. So if we are distinguishing between perspiration and inspiration, or grit and grace, what do we need for the grit component? What resources, what skills, what self are we bringing for the grit component? Well, curiosity for one, because for me, my creative life is deeply and profoundly enriched by doing a lot of reading, listening to a lot of music, engaging with the world in as wide a range of ways as I can, trying to understand the ideas that are out there. My own creativity is often somewhat agonistic and reactive to other people's ideas. So it's not uncommon for me to read a book and think, they got about half of that right, but they're missing some stuff. And I write something in response. And if I hadn't read that first book and known what I didn't like, it would not have necessarily guided me to write something else. This happens with music for me all the time. So curiosity is hugely important. Resilience, again, our ability to keep laboring, our strength, our capacity is hugely important. I think that for all components of creativity, there's this deep need for courage. We have to be brave in our laboring. You know, we have to know that it's going to be hard and that we can do it anyway. And so for me, that involves some degree of courage. Of course, the capacity to work hard. I don't think that really calls for much other commentary. Confidence without arrogance. And this comes back to that knower-learner dichotomy or distinction. We have to acknowledge our gifts and our strengths, what we bring to our creativity. And that calls for us to have some degree of confidence, but not to be arrogant, because arrogance is confidence without compassion, confidence without listening, confidence without humility. So we want to be confident that we are capable of doing this labor and birthing something new creatively without being so full of ourselves that we leave no room for that spirit. Mindfulness and focus. Focus is so important. And we may get there in many different ways. I'll come back to kinds of practices that we might pursue for this, but we definitely need to be able to focus because there is so much labor. There are so many decisions to make. There's so much problem solving in creativity. And so we have to be able to focus. Comfort with discomfort. When the labor, when the work is hard, when it's stressful, when we are feeling anxious about it, or feeling overwhelmed, or even feeling despairing that we don't have anything to say, we have to live with that discomfort and grow comfortable with it. We have to, as the Buddha would say, we have to invite that discomfort to tea and have a conversation with it. So we need that. Of course, a sense of playfulness to sort of balance out the hard work and the labor and the travail. So even when we're laboring, there has to be some lightness or some joy to it. I think that's really important. So, of course, on the inspiration side or the grace side, we need to be open to the possibility of inspiration, of grace, of inbreaking spirit. What do we need for that? Well, we need, I think, to be able to tolerate silence. That's a really hard one for me, but one I work on, because sometimes it is in silence that we receive these gifts. So we have to be available to the silence. We need patience. And for me, the patience goes with humility, and I'll come back to humility, but the patience partly has to do with the idea that we are not 100% in control of this process. We might be 90 or 95% in control of it, but not 100%. So there is some patience, there is some waiting. We need that. We need humility, and I don't mean false humility. So I don't mean self-degradation. I don't mean humiliation. I mean by humility, literally the correct understanding of ourselves, of both our capacities and our limits, of our interdependence, of our interconnectedness, of our place in a greater world, in a greater vision, in a greater dream of love and justice. We need openness to that spirit. You can capitalize it or not as you like, but we need to be ready to have it or her blow in and upend us and teach us new things. For me, this actually often happens when my creative projects talk back to me. I'm not going to say more about that now, but if anyone's curious, you can ask me in the Q&A and discussion, and I'll talk about that a little. There needs to be some sense of spaciousness. And again, this is part of that paradox. We need to be organized. We need to make decisions. We need to solve problems. There's a lot of labor, but there has to be some sense of spaciousness, of openness, of room, of reception for something that is bigger than our egos and our agendas. Which leads to this next point. We need to have some capacity to discern when we do receive a message about a creative project. Is this the spirit leading us? Is this a good intuition, a good invitation? Or is this our egos cleverly, deftly hiding and pretending to be that spirit and actually leading us in a wrong direction? So we have to kind of be able to discern the messages we receive in our openness and what to do with them. Here too, I think we need courage, but for different reasons. Being open, being receptive, being quiet is really hard in our society. It does not train us to do that. So it takes some degree of bravery to sit and wait and be uncomfortable. And therefore, we also need comfort with discomfort when we are in that waiting period, in that silent period, striving for patience, striving for openness. We might well be uncomfortable, and we have to live and cope with that as we go. Then, of course, there's this discernment piece about, in a given moment, what do I need? Is this a grit moment or is this a grace moment? How do I even know what's called for? And for me, one really important answer is we need self-knowledge. We need to understand ourselves. We need to know our creative processes. We need to know our wounds and our gifts. We need to know our hopes and our fears. The better we know ourselves, the more we will be able in a given moment to ask, what do I need to do in this moment to move this project forward? Do I need to work or do I need to wait? And the answer will be right if we know ourselves well. Kindness, self-kindness. We need to be so gentle with ourselves. This work is so hard. It takes so much out of us. So we need to forgive ourselves over and over again. If we get the discernment wrong, we need to forgive ourselves. If the creative project isn't quite as good as we wanted, we can come back to it later. But if we don't, we still need to forgive ourselves and be gentle with ourselves. Really important. We need to trust in the creative process or our creative process. If we know ourselves well enough and we know what that process is and how that works for us, and I can talk about mine later or not as you see fit. You can talk about yours later as well. We can have a conversation. But our creative processes might be a little different person to person. So once we know ourselves, we can trust in how our process is working. And yes, for the third time, we need comfort with comfort, because any sort of discernment process, at least in my experience, is virtually always at least a little bit uncomfortable, because it's always possible to get it wrong. And even though the stakes might be very low, they're not always low, and it can be a challenging situation. So we need to be able to sit in that discernment process even when it is uncomfortable. So now we get to some of the kinds of spiritual practices that I think can help us. I don't know any of your individual stories all that well, so I would never want to suggest very specific things to you, but here are some kind of broad arenas that I think can be helpful. Silent meditation comes in many, many forms, and some of them might be more or less useful for this. But silent meditation, in addition to being just a wonderful venue for spiritual growth, is a great way to practice the silence that comes with the waiting for the inspiration. Sensory meditation, like the little body prayer I took us through before. I think that our creative lives are deeply enriched by our sensory presence. So when you're writing, whether you're writing a novel, you're writing nonfiction, whatever you're writing a memoir, especially true, you need to be able to describe sensory reality, which means you need to be aware of it. So anything we can do that brings us back to our senses, that gets us out of our anxiety, out of our regret, out of our focus on the past and the future, so that we are in the present, is helpful in opening up our creativity, and sometimes even in giving us ideas or inspiration. Traditional prayer, of course, comes in many forms. And here I'm thinking particularly of kind of liturgical prayers that one might do in a worship service or alone, but that involve already existing language. This can be a way of opening ourselves up and seeking wisdom and spirit and inspiration. But at least as important in my book as traditional prayer is spontaneous prayer. Those times when we wish to ask for help, when we wish to give thanks for what is good around us, when we wish to look at the world and go, wow. And I believe Anne Lamott is the person who's been credited with saying that kind of the three basic prayer forms are help, thanks, and wow. I think all of them are really important for creativity. We can seek guidance in our creative projects. We can give thanks when we receive that guidance, or when we look at something we've created and my gosh, it's pretty good. And we can say, wow, when we think about the astonishing reality that here we are at all, here we are together, here we are with shared interests and shared joys and shared creativity, despite what our various diversities might be. Wow is pretty good sometimes. Then, of course, there's our engagement with creativity in the world. Some people might not consider this a spiritual practice, but I absolutely do. So again, inspiration in, inspiration out. The more we engage with the world's creativity, the more ideas we will get for our own, the more we will learn what is good quality and what is less good quality. And so the more we engage with other people's creativity, with their projects, with creativity in their relationships, in how they attend to their jobs, whatever it might be, because there are many, many aspects of creativity. The more we do this humbly, and that word humble is really important here, the more we do this with the mindset of a learner and someone who has much to grow into, and someone who, I'm now going to take a moment and quote a line from Brian Wren's wonderful hymn, Bring Many Names. In the original fourth verse, he has the line about God, that God is willing to be changed by what you've started. I find this one of the most profound pieces of spiritual wisdom I have ever run into. We must be willing to be changed by what we've started. That is, by our creative projects, as much as by our spiritual development. And our engagement with creativity in the world will help us do that. Then, of course, there's cultivating our own virtues. And here I'm thinking of things like courage and patience. We can certainly talk about the fruit of the Spirit, but in terms of our own labor, because there is a component of this that is about our labor, we can cultivate courage and patience and compassion and love and generosity and hospitality and so on. And as we develop our own virtues, we will deepen our creative capacity, as well as our ability to appreciate the creativity of others. In one of the little essays of mine that I hope you will eventually get, and I'll come back to this, I talk about creativity as a kind of relationship and as something that is enhanced by relationships. So anything we do to build relationships in our lives with ourselves, with our friends, with those who love us, with people we don't know, with our enemies, with the sacred, all of these kinds of spiritual practices can enhance our creativity in a range of ways. They're also just good spiritual practices more broadly. Being of service to others, obviously a general spiritual practice, but also one that I think can inspire our creativity and open us up. It is a great way to learn about things and people we don't know about. And of course, to go with that, the work we do for justice will help make a world in which more people are able to be creative and access creativity. That's a good thing. It also is one of the things I believe Jesus absolutely demanded that we do. So these are, broadly speaking, some practices. And for each of you, you can sort of ask, which of these speak to me? How am I doing these now? Is there one of these I might take up specifically in relationship to creativity to see how that might go? So I'm coming to the end of the formal part of this talk. I have put together an extensive handout. We have not quite figured out how we're going to get it to you yet, but we're working on that. And so I want to talk about that for a couple of minutes. A few years ago, I did this creativity training called Grit and Grace. It was for a bunch of pastors in the Midwest, and it was on Zoom because everything was on Zoom then. And there were a ton of materials. So I have recompiled those. Some of them I've updated or modified for your purposes, and some I've left as they are, and some I've left out because they're not relevant here. But there are seven short essays. You can see the titles of those essays here. And then there are 7 pieces of practical writing along with some creativity exercises. So we're going to figure out how to get you both a copy of this slideshow if you want it and a copy of that handout, which is probably close to 30 pages long. I wouldn't be surprised, but I'm happy to share that with people if it can be of some help. So with that, we actually move to the open space for the rest of our time. And I always like to kind of set up the discussion / Q&A by saying that I have been talking for almost half an hour now, and it's time for you to do some talking. I would love to know your thoughts. I would love to know your experiences. And I would love this to be a discussion space where people give each other suggestions, because I'm far from the only expert in the room. If you have objections to any of the things I've said, I'd be fascinated to know what those are. And of course, if you genuinely have questions for me, I'd be, more than happy to try to answer them. So with that, I think we are done. So I will stop my share. And I am not going to be able to monitor the chat, but I am here for you to listen and to talk as you see fit.
Thank you so much, Amanda. That was such a great, I don't want to use the word overview because it was really a comprehensive look at the topic. So thank you so much. And we, as Amanda said, we're now going to have time for both Q&A and discussion. So if you, I'll be moderating that. So if you can raise your hand using the little emoticon, please do so, or you can, wave your hands, although I'm not always able to see. Or if you have a question or comment, you can also put it in the chat.
One quick question before we start. Kate, I see that some people are putting their emails in the chat. Are you able to collect those in some way and get them to me without me having to deal with them right now?
And why don't you, Amanda, I know you had talked about giving your email address, if that's okay.
Sure.
So why
What?
don't you go
Yep.
ahead and do that
Yep.
now? And we're also going to be working on a distribution system, as Amanda mentioned. So yeah, I'll say
Okay.
I'll go through the chat and save the emails that are shared. But if you registered for this account for this event, we should have your email. So don't feel like everybody has to do that.
Okay. So I have put my I put my email in the chat, and as I say there, anyone is welcome to contact me to hang out and gab or to request materials or whatever. So now, sorry about that delay. Let's open this up.
So I usually start us off with a question just to kick us off, and then please raise your hand if you want. But I just like to go back. You said something in one of your early slides about I'm not sure if you used the word constraints, but you gave the example of the constraint of your using existing hymnal music or word count. And I thought what you were going to talk about was more of a discipline, and maybe that's what you were referring to when you talked about your creative process, like the balance of, having a set time and expectation for doing X, Y, and Z versus a more fluid or loose. And I'm sorry if you said that and I missed it, but if you could just maybe comment on sort of the discipline of
Sure.
creativity.
So I had elected not to talk about that because I'm not sure I'm a very good role model for anyone on that front. I do not write 3 pages every morning. I don't have a set time every day that I am creative. My philosophy for myself, and I don't know that this works for anyone else, is I get an idea, I write it down. As soon as I have some free time, I come back to it and ask if that's the moment to work on it. And if it's not, the next time I have some free time, I come back to it again. So I am not very disciplined in the kinds of ways that many creativity trainers are. I weave my creativity literally through the interstices of my life. And it's not at all uncommon. I have a day job. I'm actually sitting in my office right now. I work at a college, and it's not uncommon for me to do some work for my job and then stop and write a verse for a hymn or write down an idea for a new book or something and then get back to work. So sadly, Kate, I'm not a great model for the kind of discipline you're talking about. But if anyone has had good luck with that kind of discipline, please share it with the group.
Thank you. Well, I think that's really honest. And as someone who's woven creativity into, lots of different demands of life, I think that's actually validating. So appreciate that. Who else has a question or a comment?
Kate, I have a
Pam
comment.
Taylor, I see your hand up. Oh, and then Carla, did you come off mute?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Carla. I was going to
Oh, sorry.
respond
Hold on a
to.
second. Okay, Pam,
Okay.
can you hold on and let's let Carla go first, and then we'll have
Sure.
Pam go. Go ahead, Carla.
Thank you. So, in response to Amanda, I also have a day job, so I now feel a little better that I'm not alone. But with what you had shared just recently about the practices, can you speak a little bit more about the sensory part?
Sure.
Yeah, please.
So
Thank you.
I think I said briefly that for me, part of the point of kind of sensory prayer or sensory awareness is I find it really easy to get caught up in anxiety about the future and depression or regrets about the past. And so anything that grounds me in the present moment is a way to keep me from going down rabbit holes that are not going to help my creativity. So and interestingly, most of the sensory exercises I deal with are actually things I developed to help white people deal with white discomfort in relationship to racism, which is pretty funny. I developed some of them. I also found a lot of them. Resma Menachem is a wonderful anti-racism trainer who works on this as a psychotherapist. But so things as simple as, if you're sort of getting caught up in your anxiety or your regret or whatever it might be, literally stop and look around the room and identify 5 different things in the room that have different colors or different textures. Or this is harder, stop and listen and see if you can identify at least 3 different sounds and what they are. Or a touch one that I find really common. One of the ways that we can comfort ourselves and give ourselves a little dose of oxytocin is literally by crossing our arms and using our hands to kind of rub our arms. It's a self-comforting thing, but it's also a great sensory awareness kind of exercise. So when I do that now, if I feel in need of some self-comfort, I try to pay attention to what does my sweatshirt feel like? Or if I'm in short sleeves, what does my skin feel like? Or if I'm, stressing out about something and I kind of need to come back to earth, I will literally put my hands on my cheeks and ask, are my hands cold? Are my hands warm? I mean, literally just that basic. I hope that helps.
That helps a lot. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Carla. Great question. Pam Taylor, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to hear about practical writing. I was just curious as to what you mean by that.
Practical writing. I'm trying to remember where I used that phrase.
It was it was right after relationship building.
Okay. Let me take a quick sneak peek at my, okay, actually I'm not gonna be able to get to my slides quickly enough.
That's okay.
So I think
Maybe it was just something you misheard, if that doesn't ring a bell, Amanda.
yeah,
did you say
yes,
nonfiction writing? At one point you made the distinction of like if you're writing a novel or nonfiction.
Okay. So yeah, when I was I think when I mentioned different kinds of writing, it was in the context of why we need the sensory awareness. I think that's why I was talking about it.
Okay.
So I think this is especially important if one is writing a memoir. I have not written one, but I've read enough of them to know you really need to be able to capture your experiences and the things that have happened to you and the things you've done. And sensory awareness is really important in making those things vivid and real for people. But if you're writing fiction, you have to bring someone into an imaginary world. And a great way to do that is also through kind of sensory imagery. The closest I come to this is there are times when I have written songs where I'm trying to tell a story in the song, and putting people in a scene really can help with that. So many years ago, I wrote, I'll try to be brief with this, but I was trying to write a song about some of the ways that kind of excessively macho masculinity actually hurts boys. So I wrote a song called 3 Strikes, and the narrator is sort of sympathetically observing this little kid who's being really sort of bullied into being macho. And a couple of the verses of the song are sort of set in sports settings where you can see that the kid is really under pressure and stressed out, and it's on him to throw 3 strikes in a row and so on. So making things vivid can be helpful. And even in my own nonfiction writing, I basically start the book Abundant Lives with a real story about what happened when I went to a memorial for a mass shooting in my city. And so, boy, that needed a lot of sensory work to get right. So hopefully that helps a little. I'm sorry, I can't do better. Okay, who's up next?
Amanda, we have a question in the chat.
Okay.
Sorry. Oops, I just...
No, all good.
So Cindy McMillian wrote, when you write something or in the process of writing something, do you have someone, a group of someone's with whom you discuss your writing or ideas, people to bounce ideas off of? If so,
Yes.
Do you find that helpful or not?
I definitely do. And to me, that's part of the relationship piece. And so I'll quickly share a story that's in the little essay on creativity as relationship. I do not work with a writer's group per se, but I have friends who beta read. My spouse beta reads everything. My father is the person who taught me to write songs. And so while he was still alive, I ran a lot of my songs by him. So some years ago, I wanted to write a song that took some of the kind of farming and gardening language that I often ran into in evangelical worship songs, in which it's about evangelizing, but I wanted to sort of twist that a little bit and make it to be about kind of the spiritual growth that we can do in community that's not necessarily evangelizing. So I had this title, Bringing in the Harvest, and I knew that. And I thought, okay, the first verse is going to be all about gardening. And then in the second verse, I will move the song into how this is really a metaphor for the work that we are doing to grow ourselves and transform the world and so on. So I wrote this first verse. I know nothing about gardening. I am an urban New Yorker by background. I have a brown thumb. I won't say I hate green things. I mean, you can't live in Colorado and hate green things. But anyway, I wrote the first verse, and my spouse grew up in Nebraska and is a gardener. So I brought the first verse to her and said, "What do you think?" And she laughed in my face and said, "This is terrible. You clearly know nothing about gardening." And I said, "Okay, great." And I ran it by my father, who had become a gardener when he left New York and kind of moved to the country. I didn't tell him what my spouse had said. I simply said, "What do you think?" And he laughed in my face and said, "This is terrible. You clearly know nothing about gardening." And that's where the humility piece comes in. That's why it's really important to be humble. So chastened, I said, okay, what needs to be fixed? So I interviewed my dad and I interviewed my spouse and said, what should this first verse have in it? What order should it come in? How do I make this credible? So that was hugely important to me. Both of the books that I wrote, that I shouldn't say I wrote them this year. I mostly wrote them last year. They came out this year. I had beta readers for both of them. They had many suggestions. The suggestions were fabulous. They made both books better. So, and so I think, the existence of this group, this Tuesday night group, tells me that we all know we crave relationship and community in so many ways, around our creativity, around our spiritual or religious values, and just because we're human. So yes, absolutely. Find trustworthy people you can show things to. It really helps if they are spiritually mature enough to not be completely invested in their own egos. So.
Thank you, Amanda. So we have another question in the chat, but before I read that one, I want to see if anybody else wants to come off mute and ask a question. Does anybody want to come off mute and say something or ask a question? I'm scanning through so if you're raising your hand, hold it, keep it up.
Refried Bean has a hand up.
Okay, I see Refried Bean. Okay, go for it. And then we'll go to Scott's question in the chat. Go ahead, Refried Bean.
Amanda, that paradox list was awesome. I love it. It's one of the best creativity things I've ever seen. And so that's my question is, with some of that or the meditation practices, do you think it's possible to work on your environment and state of mind and overdo it without the product, or can some of it happen simultaneously? I guess that's my question.
So I think that's sort of a both and. I'm going to take the most positive interpretation of that I can and say, sometimes we do spiritual work just to grow spiritually, and it can help our creativity, and that's all to the good. But sometimes the creative process itself is a spiritual process. And so I do think, if I'm hearing you correctly, I do think that in the process of creating, in the process of writing or composing or choreographing or whatever it might be, I think those practices are working on us and in us in that venue. And, I'm worried that because of my kind of focus on the labor piece of this, that it sounds like I'm taking myself exceedingly seriously. And I do that, unfortunately, far too often. But when we can take ourselves lightly and simply be there with that creative energy and not take ourselves too seriously and not worry that we alone must solve everything in the world and so on, things are likely to go a little bit better for us. So yeah, I think I think that there's space for these practices for their own purpose. I think there's space for them in relation to our creativity. And I think our creativity itself helps us build those muscles. And it's not always hard work and stress and tears. Sometimes it's light and joy.
Thanks.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that. Amanda, and I really do appreciate that because I know in my own writing, I've found that the writing itself is the spiritual practice. So I'm glad for you to note that. I see Jenny's hand, but let's go to Scott's question in the chat first, and then we'll go to Jenny. So Scott Spradley wrote, for us day job people, can you describe some of the ways you find space to write and pull the various pieces of what you desire to write together? Thanks, Scott.
So it probably helps that I don't have children. And it probably helps that I'm in a marriage where we are both very, very independent. So my life is sort of largely my own to sculpt. And I'm also extremely lucky to have a day job that is wildly flexible in terms of when I do it. It's very, I don't teach, I'm not a professor anymore. So my job is very project driven, and I can do those projects any time of day as long as I get them done. So what I have learned is that in any given day, I have some things I need to do for my job. I have some creative projects I would like to move forward in some way. And incidentally, that also can include marketing your completed book. I've learned the hard way that is, boy, is that a set of tasks. But anyway, I digress. So for me, it is about understanding what times of day I'm at my best for what kinds of things. I can do work for my job kind of any time of the day and it'll be successful, but I cannot be creative first thing in the morning. In that way, I'm not a morning person. So I have learned that I should do chores in the morning or work on my job in the morning or run errands in the morning or whatever. And I know most of us do not have jobs as flexible as mine. So I'm sorry that part won't translate. But I've learned that the later in the day it gets, the better my creative juices are and the easier it is for me. So it's not uncommon for me to do a whole day worth of work, have dinner, after dinner, sit down at the computer and literally knock out a hymn text if I already know what the topic is or, whatever. So it's understanding what your obligations are. And it also can mean, when are you willing to make sacrifices to have that creative time? So I also don't spend a whole lot of time socializing with people. I'm a pretty private person in a lot of ways. So the time that I'm not working on my job or taking care of the house or eating meals is largely time that I have been able to kind of free up for my creativity and the things that go with it. Everyone is going to have their own answer to that. But really, it is about asking, what are the non-negotiables that I cannot wish away, that I have to take into account as I plan? What are the things that I can put on hold for a little while? And is my creative project something that has any sort of external deadline or not? Because believe me, once I had due dates for those manuscripts, a lot of other things went away for a while.
Thanks. Great question.
Yeah.
Jenny, do you want to come off mute?
Hi, thank you so much, Amanda. I appreciate what you've contributed. And I just wanted, this is sort of a comment. I can't sing at all, so I don't relate at all to writing hymns or any sorts of songs. But what that reminded me of is that during the pandemic, I was part of this creative responses to stress thing. I'm a physician, so it was towards healthcare workers. And another colleague of mine had everybody write haiku. And it's so simple, and it was a doorway like into other things. And I shared what grief walking is, which isn't totally relevant to this, but that embodied experience of walking and talking and communicating. So I love you getting in those senses, but I just want to remind people, like, I'm exactly 50-50 on all those left-right brain things. But as much as we can, like, I was inspired by you thinking, well, one of my creative things would be to try to write a hymn, because that would get my brain working totally differently than it's used to. And that's when a lot of it opens up. So if you don't think you can draw, maybe draw. If you can't write music, try to write a hymn. If, try some haiku. But for me, that's what I learned through all of that, was going out of get comfortable with discomfort and try something that you think you're not good at in order to get to the creative space.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Thanks so much, Jenny. We have about 10 more minutes, a little less than 10 more minutes. So I encourage everyone to raise your hand or put in the chat if you have more questions or comments. And I'll jump in with one as I'm waiting to see if others. This is more of a, can you say it again? Because I really liked what you said about humility and went by kind of fast. And so I struggle a lot with the issue of, or what is humility, especially from a feminist lens, like when there's perhaps as a woman, there's people in the room who are dominating, who are not women. And, but that's just one element of it. So, if you can talk a little bit about, you said sort of false humility, and then when you kind of listed off what you consider false humility, I really liked it and I went by kind of quickly. So, but I do believe that, of course, humility is an incredibly important spiritual virtue. And of course, all traditional teachings teach us that. So can you just say a little bit about what humility does and doesn't mean for you?
Sure. And I feel as though I should also mention that back in, I think, the 1960s, the feminist theologian Valerie Saving wrote this essay in which she asked whether, and this was pretty radical back then, whether sin for women might in fact be self-abnegation rather than pride. And whether in fact when men wrote about, pride as a sin, they were generalizing to humanity something that in fact has been kind of encoded in certain forms of masculinity that might not be entirely ideal. So that aside, I am not normally a big Aristotelian, but I think one way of thinking about virtue that I associate with Aristotle is this idea that there can be kind of extremes on two ends that are both problematic for different reasons, and that sometimes somewhere in between them is the virtue to strive for. And one of Aristotle's examples is sort of cowardice and foolhardiness on the extremes and courage in the middle. So with that in mind, I think that on sort of one end of the humility scale, as it were, is the kind of arrogance that says, I am more important than other people. I am more entitled than other people. I don't have to listen to other people. As a sociologist who works on inequality, I can tell you that kind of arrogance goes with being in a socially overvalued group. So we could have a whole conversation that we don't have time for about white arrogance and male arrogance and so on and so on. But that aside, so arrogance is a spiritual problem, but also it's a creative problem because it keeps us from seeing where we have room to improve, where we have room to learn. People who are arrogant because they are insecure famously cannot take constructive criticism about their creative work. So arrogance is a problem. But then there is self-abnegation, or what I would maybe call humiliation, shame. So there is such a thing as feeling that one is not enough, that one is not truly as good a person as others, that there's many ways to sort of frame that. When I think of humility as the right space, the bed or the porridge that was just right, humility is us in right relationship with ourselves, each other, the planet around us, the sacred. So it's really simple. Humility is us in right relationship, but that's really hard because we are not given a lot of guidance about how to be in right relationship with anyone. So being in right relationship with ourselves means we're not arrogant, but we're also not humiliated. We are beautiful, flawed, imperfect, jars of clay with sacred light shining through our cracks, right? That's I'm pulling a lot of different sources together in that one. So if we think of humility as right relationship, humiliation is a sense that we are inadequate to be in relationship. Arrogance is the inability to be in relationship because there's nothing but our ego out there. I could say hours about this. I'll stop there.
Thanks. And it looks like Jenny wants to jump. Oh, actually, Jenny, if it's okay, let's let Ken come in because he hasn't had a chance to talk, and then we'll go to you. Go ahead, Ken. Thank you.
My question is about the role of the subconscious in this creative process. And it seems to me like my subconscious really works hard when there's an unanswered question, there's an unsolved problem, those kind of things. Is that something that you might speak to, the part of us that's working on stuff when we're doing other things?
I don't know that I have much to add. I think you're exactly right. I do think that sometimes the doing of other things gives our subconscious permission to do that work. And I'll just quickly say, I come up with some of my best song ideas in the shower. And I think that's related to this. But since we're running out of time, let's leave it there. But yes, you're exactly right.
Thanks, Ken. Great question. Jenny, did you put your hand down or you want to come back in?
Only if no one else needs to say something.
Go for it.
It's just a comment in which I'm bad at this. So it's just, Amanda, you made me laugh literally out loud with my mute on when you said that your wife and your dad both told you it was terrible. And you then said, I had the humility to deal with it, because I put in the chat that humility comes from the word humus, right? Which is soil. And you were talking about soil, and I just thought it was hysterical that you were talking about soil and you had humility, but that definition of like being grounded in the real of who you are and who somebody else is and who's in the world. So you're not either better or worse or whatever, but you are you, right? And being grounded in who you are and all of it is humility. And I love that, just being grounded.
Excellent. Thank you.
Sounds like a song, Amanda.
I actually have 2 hymns that have the image of being grounded in them. So yes, but thank you, Jenny. I think that's exactly right. And I hadn't even made that connection. So thanks for making it for me.
Great. Well, I'm just going to give people one last chance. We're running out of time, but if anybody has anything burning.
And again, my email is in the chat. Please, any of you contact me. I'm happy to be in touch and I'm happy to send materials.
Great. Well, I just want to thank you again, Amanda. Refried Bean, did you have your hand up again?
Yes, I just want to tell Amanda, I think it's really cool that you're a hymn writer, and it just sounds so real to me, like that was a creative person and you did what you were inspired to do. It's really awesome.
Yeah, well, great point. And Refried Bean, writing for your life has not traditionally encompassed songwriting, but maybe this will be a new domain for writing for your life. So other hymn writers or songwriters, be in touch. And we will try to figure out a way to send out the materials to everyone who registered for the webinar. But I want to just close by thanking Amanda Udis-Kessler for her time and her expertise and her spirit of creativity and generosity, which has really shown through all night, Amanda. So thank you so much. And this recording will also be available on YouTube, so you can listen again if you, as I do, want to listen one more time or a couple more times and take notes. But thank you so much, Amanda. And our next Writing for Your Life second Tuesday will be on November 12th, 2024 at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. And we have a really great speaker, Marie Chan, who will be speaking about the intersection of faith and justice. So I encourage you all to rejoin us in November. But in the meantime, thanks again to Amanda and to everyone who participated tonight. Take care. Thanks again.